Welcome to Concert 101, where you get background information on the music coming up in the next concert by the Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra. It's a concert called Beethoven's Seventh, and that work, Beethoven's Symphony No. 7, occupies the second half of the concert. In the first half, we have The Dances of Marosszek by Hungarian composer Zoltán Kodály, which lasts for about 12 minutes, and after that, a world premiere, the Violin Concerto by contemporary Australian composer Joe Chindamo, with McGrath, TSO Concertmaster, as soloist. Conducting the concert is Otto Tausk, who is music director of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra. I'm delighted to say that he's going to join me a little bit later to chat about the program. In the meantime, let's get some background on the three works. As mentioned, the concert opens with The Dances of Marosszek by Kodály. In his long life, Kodály contributed to the fields of music composition, ethnomusicology and music education. Like his friend and fellow Hungarian Béla Bartók, Kodály developed a strong interest in the folk music of Eastern Europe, an interest that fed into his original compositions. For instance, the themes in the piece that we're going to hear, The Dances of Marosszek, are transcriptions of traditional melodies from parts of present-day Romania. But it seems to me that where Kodály's folk-derived orchestral music differs from Bartók's is that he overlays it with a much heavier orchestral gloss. The folk sources sit more in the background than in Bartók's music. The Marosszek dances remind me more than anything of the Hungarian dances of Johannes Brahms. If the music sounds folk-like and exotic, it's because of the twists and turns in the melodies. Kodály wrote the work for solo piano, orchestrating it in 1929, and it's become far better known in its orchestral version, which is understandable, as it's the orchestral colours and shadings that bring the piece to life. Take note of the theme heard at the start. It's a rather doleful melody, as it forms the backbone of the entire work, returning in various guises as the piece progresses. Despite the plural title, Dances of Marosszek, the various dances run one into the other, so you'll hear the piece in one continuous, albeit contrasting movement. And the finish, when it arrives, is fresh and upbeat, with all traces of the doleful main theme well and truly expunged. It's not every day that you get to hear a world premiere, but you will in this concert, because the second work on the program is the Violin Concerto by Melbourne-based composer and performer Joe Chindamo. This is the second TSO premiere of a work by Chindamo in recent memory. The TSO commissioned and gave the first performance of his Concerto for Orchestra in November 2021. In the program note that he's written for the Violin Concerto, Chindamo points out that he's adhered to conventional three-movement concerto form, with fast outer movements and closing a slow middle movement. As for the tone and character of the concerto, let's save that for my discussion with conductor Otto Tausk, who's been studying the score. After interval, we have the Symphony No. 7 by Ludwig van Beethoven. Almost without exception, Beethoven wrote each of his 9 symphonies in a different key, and this one's in A major, which is a sunny, radiant key. This might reflect the spirit of the times in which the symphony was written, which was at the tail end of the Napoleonic Wars. Beethoven's Seventh was premiered in Vienna in December 1813. It's been suggested that audiences at the time linked the mood of euphoria in the Seventh to the inevitable defeat of Napoleon and his troops. Without question, there is something upbeat about the Seventh. It commences with a slow introduction marked poco sostenuto, which is a great setup to what is otherwise a fast movement. And when we arrive at the quick section, vivace, it's the flute that introduces the main theme. We leave A major behind for the second movement, which is in the parallel minor key, A minor. There's a noble simplicity to this movement. The opening theme is in dactylic rhythm, long, short, short, and sounds like this. This has always been one of Beethoven's most popular symphony movements. The audience at the premiere gave it such an ovation it had to be repeated on the spot. If you've seen the Oscar-winning film The King's Speech, you'll recognise this movement, as it was used in that movie at the climactic point, the radio speech in which King George VI declared war on Hitler's Germany. Two quick movements follow, a scherzo, marked presto, and a brisk finale, allegro con brio. In the finale, Beethoven makes powerful and repeated use of the orchestral tutti, the entire orchestra playing all at once. In fact, the whole orchestra plays almost all of the time. What's more, Beethoven indicates that the orchestra is to play loudly, fortissimo, sforzando, and in the last 30 seconds or so, triple forte or fortissimo. And this is the first appearance of this in a Beethoven symphony. Here's the opening of the final movement. Despite the volume that Beethoven calls for, the orchestra required for the seventh isn't particularly large. It's exactly the same as that required for Beethoven's first two symphonies. Two each of the wind instruments, two horns, two trumpets, and no trombones. So there's a quick survey of the music, but let's chat now with conductor Otto Tausk and take a closer look at Joe Chindamo's Violin Concerto and Beethoven's Symphony. Otto, thank you so much for coming on to talk about the music. Now, I'd like to start with the Joe Chindamo Violin Concerto. We'll all be hearing this for the first time, but you've studied the score, so what can you tell us about this piece?
Well, this is a good question because I will be hearing it for the first time as well. So, of course, I've looked at the notes, but doing them in reality is always different from what you expect it to be. But on the page, it looks really exciting. It's a very rhythmical piece with lots of rhythmical drive in it, and it's also... It changes in the atmosphere very quickly. So suddenly you're in a different world. And then you're in a world where it's almost like an improvisation for the violin soloist. And then the orchestra is just way back more into the background. And it's like as if she's wandering off somewhere else into another landscape. It's a fascinating piece.
Well, see, that's interesting because I think he has a strong background in jazz.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised altogether to hear that about this sort of thread of improvisation.
Mm-hmm.
In his comments for the piece, Joe Chindamo has said that his vision was to create a work that reflects the pulse of our time, a musical snapshot of our age. Does it seem that way to you?
It does. It does. It kind of reminds me of that, like, very flexible, very rhythmical, very exciting, but also in a way hypnotizing world of repetitive music. It is actually reflecting the world we live in, and that's a great thing about music. It kind of shows the world we live in without speaking about it too much. Just listen to it and feel the world.
Now, the main work, I suppose, on the program, or the largest work, the longest work on the program, is Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. Now, unlike the Chindamo, this is a staple of the orchestral repertoire. Does that pose its own set of challenges to bring freshness and vitality to such a well-known and much-loved work?
Yes, it does, because everyone knows it, because all the orchestras in the world have played it a million times. What have I got to add to this score? But as soon as you start playing Beethoven 7, or any Beethoven symphony for that matter, it's somehow always fresh. And that's just, I think it's one of the mysteries of Beethoven's music, is that it doesn't matter how often you perform the work, there's always new things to be discovered, and it always grabs you immediately. And it's in a way, it is very related to the Chindamo piece because it's so rhythmical. It's built on very small motives, just existing with rhythm and nothing else. And then he builds an entire symphony on these small motives. But the power of the rhythm is so incredibly strong that even if you've heard it for 1,000,000 times, it still feels fresh.
Because, I mean, Wagner famously, described this symphony as the apotheosis of the dance. Is that what he was getting at there, the idea of rhythm?
Yes, I think it is that physical excitement you feel when you hear Beethoven's rhythms that are so strong and so direct that there's a big urge to move around, and that's I can really understand why and where that quote comes from. Now I've always had a little bit of difficulty in seeing myself dance to the music of Beethoven, but why not?
Yeah. And I mean, and even in the second movement, which isn't really a slow movement, it's marked allegretto, but rhythm is even it's also a key driver in that.
It is,
as well.
and I think this is a very, very important remark about the second movement, which is it is not a slow movement, but because everything else is pretty fast, it feels as a moment of rest and a moment of calmness. If you would only play that movement, which interestingly enough at the premiere was repeated after when they played the entire symphony, they repeated that movement. And I always want to do the same thing because it's the best music ever.
Yeah, indeed. Finally, this concert will be your 5th engagement with the TSO. You've been coming here pretty regularly since 2011. It's always a pleasure to see you here, but I'm sort of just wondering what's the attraction for you to come back and work with this orchestra?
The main absolute attraction is the musicians in the orchestra. I mean, it's so wonderful to work with this group of musicians. They are so committed and they're so tight as an orchestra. It's just a great pleasure to work with them. And also, I love the city. I've just been swimming in the ocean. It's just
in early October. I'm astounded.
Yeah, but I wear something. I wear a wetsuit, so it's not that bad. But the water is crystal clear, and the city is just so beautiful to be in.
Otto, it's always a pleasure to have you back, so thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to this concert tremendously. That brings Concert 101 to an end. I hope you've found it enlightening and that you'll join us next time, but bye for now.